It's finally here. We have a PWHL schedule.
This is the Women's Hockey Report presented by Locked On NHL. Your weekly look at the world of women's hockey. From the PWHL to the international stage, it's the Women's Hockey Report on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Women's Hockey Report, part of the Locked On NHL channel. Erica L Ayala with Rachel Donner, and we have some news to talk about. But first, let's tell you that this episode of the Women's Hockey Report brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com and win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet hits. Rachel, the schedule is here.
It is finally. I am so excited to be able to plan my life for these next few months in terms of what games I want to watch and maybe some potential travel. Definitely going to be at some New York Sirens home games. That is my home base, of course. So especially the home opener there, which is November 21st is the opening weekend, November 21st to 23rd. I do think it's interesting, though, given the expansion here, that each team is still only playing, I say only, but 30 games each, the same as last season. We saw an increase between seasons 1 and season 2, but not between season 2 and 3 with expansion, which I think is fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think, lots of different things here about the schedule, and we'll break those things down. We're also going to talk about potential takeover tour, NHL, some NHL potential double headers and things of that nature. But we also know that the teams, Rachel, they had schedule release videos, which is also new.
They did. I think they were all kind of fun in their own way, I would say. But, I think they were definitely simpler than some of the other leagues we've seen out there. But I think they did a good job. The Sirens had kids draw logos of the other teams, and they were actually all really good artists, those kids. Very impressed. Ottawa did a beaver tail food truck representation of the opponents, which checks out for Ottawa, I would say. Boston won my heart over with adoptable dogs. You cannot go wrong with adoptable dogs there. The Frost had a local news station weather guy try to work it into a weather report about a frost warning in all the different cities, including a dig at Ottawa, I would say, in terms of losing the final last year to Minnesota. Toronto had Blair Turnbull and Renata Fast playing a pool game, which I think was probably my favorite overall when all was said and done. And Montreal, poutine themed versions for each city. A lot of food in these. A lot of food. For sure. And Seattle had hot dogs for each team. Vancouver had somebody running in the woods. And there was like logos carved into the trees there. So, a nice mix of stuff.
Yeah, you said Toronto. I liked Toronto, especially because the wee woo I'm not a fan of. And I loved that little dig at New York. I just have lived in New York up until recently, my whole life, and have never heard the term wee woo until the Sirens. So
listen, I think points for originality there and going with the theme of the team name. I could see why, some people might like it and some people might not.
Yeah, not a fan, but I like Toronto. I also, although I don't like the noise rally cry, I don't know what you call it. I did like the students, the young people, and their art. We've seen things like that before. I did learn what a beaver tail is through these videos. So to which someone was like, you don't know what a beaver tail is? I was like, I don't know that I, between living in New York City and Tulsa, would have had exposure to beaver tails. So I think that in addition to that, we also, of course, found out some other things about the season overall.
Yeah, so I mentioned the opening weekend is November 21st to 23rd. Very interesting to see Seattle playing Vancouver on that opening day in Vancouver, as opposed to having them each have their own kind of moment in the spotlight. With fans being able to kind of celebrate separately at home. But Toronto is playing Minnesota that day as well. And then you have Ottawa versus New York on Saturday, Boston versus Montreal on Sunday. So very packed first weekend of action. The new Seattle team will get their home opener the week after on November 28th. And I think one thing that's really great is that no team in the league has to wait longer than a week for a home game. I think we've seen in the past with some of these leagues, extended road trips, and you don't get to a home game for maybe 3 to 4 weeks. No, everybody has a home game pretty quickly into the season, which I think is important.
Yeah, definitely agree with you there. What other things, stood out on the schedule?
So our rematch of the finals from last year, Ottawa against the Minnesota Frost, is December 2nd. So it's pretty quick into the season that we'll see that, only a couple of weeks. So I'm excited for that game in particular. Of course, I don't know the exact date, but whenever that is, I'm excited for Hillary Knight's first game in Boston. That should be really interesting and fun. To see her not in a Boston uniform is going to be a whole thing. And I'm sure they'll do like a nice tribute video for her, as teams do.
Yeah, indeed. And then, of course, also Olympic break.
Yeah, so we have the 2 breaks during this season. We have an international break December 8th through the 15th. Earlier on, and that's going to be the camps for coming together to find the Olympic teams. And then we have the Olympic break, and we have the rivalry series that'll get played during that first break. And then the official Olympic break is January 29th to February 25th. Women's hockey is being played February 5th through 19th in the Olympics. So it's like a shorter window of that, but they have to have the full Olympic break just because of, allowing players to march in closing ceremonies and all of that, and coming back a little bit later. But I think overall, it's a schedule. I think, you kind of peruse through it to try and look for some like synergy there. And I'm certainly looking for dates to travel to the different cities, as we've talked about, to get to see a game out in Vancouver or Seattle, I think is the dream for me this upcoming season. But I think, it's just good to have the schedule finally. And it's I would say like 6 or 7 weeks ahead of the season starting, which I think is better than we've had in the past. Still would have preferred to have it a little bit sooner though.
Yeah, for sure. And then the last thing I would say about the schedule is that we've already identified that there are some double headers with NHL teams. Seattle has one, I know for sure, in April, or excuse me, that's we'll talk about that later because there are some TBD dates. I think it's in January on the 20th. The Devils are in town for the Kraken, and I think is it New York and Seattle, I believe. And so there's also one where Philly, if I'm not mistaken, will be in town, which is a team, the Flyers
Right.
that you cover.
Yeah. So the day of the Sirens home opener on the 29th of November is an afternoon game. And then the Flyers will be playing the Devils that night. So it'd be a good day to spend at the Prudential Center watching some really good hockey. And I think it's good when you have those opportunities, right? To have kind of a full day of activities and a little cross promotion there, and maybe having some of the NHL players show up at the PWHL game and vice versa, and doing some of the marketing work and joining the broadcast. Now, Let's talk about the broadcast for a second, because we still do not have broadcast information if there's going to be any local deals like we had last year for some of the teams and everything's on YouTube, or is there going to be a bigger broadcast deal? Still literally in the dark about that as of now. So that's an important piece of information. That's kind of the next step here.
Yeah, so we shall see how it all plays out. But coming up next, we're going to break down some of those TBD dates and what it means for the schedule and for the teams.
The NFL season is finally here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. And I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet, whether you're into player props or building a same game parlay, or if you like to jump in live as the action is going on and make an additional bet. It's quick, it's easy, and the best way to add a little more energy to your football Sundays. And having just attended the NFL Europe game in Dublin between the Steelers and the Vikings, I'm going to say I would not bet on either team to win the Super Bowl, but I think the Steelers are finding ways to win now, which is making it interesting. So you might want to take a closer look at them, especially their defense, which looks real good right now. So are you ready to play? You can download the FanDuel app by visiting fanduel.com to get started. That's fanduel.com to place your first $5 bet.
Thanks for joining us here for the Women's Hockey Report. Erica L Ayala with Rachel Donner. Feeling a little under the weather here, Rachel. So I'm happy. These are the days when you're happy that you have a co-host. But blame my immune system and not my heart, people. We'll get the energy back. We'll get the energy back here. Seasons change usually means, especially being on planes, that I catch a little bug here and there. But nothing more than a little bit of a cold as far as I know. So just bear with me, folks. We'll be feeling better a little bit later. So Rachel, I'm going to again go to you here, and I will just nod in agreement for most of this. But we talked a little bit about the Takeover Tour before on the show. And I even since we, of course, want to thank Angelica and Ava for hopping in while we were at the aforementioned NFL game in Europe. And one of the things that we talked about was the schedule or lack thereof at the time. But also Ava had joined us for the PWHL Seattle deep dive, and we were wondering about Takeover Tour. And so we don't know for sure, but there's upward of, I think it's 20 dates across.
It's 20 dates, yes.
Where we don't have locations.
Yeah, I think obviously there's not going to be 20 dates in the Takeover Tour. Like, that much is certain here. And so obviously some of these dates will be Takeover Tour games, and some of them are just there's a venue conflict and they need to find a different place for the game, and they have not confirmed that enough to put it in the schedule, or there's something going on around it where they can't announce it yet. We know they've done that sort of thing in the past, so I would not be surprised. And there's a couple things going on here that I think are interesting, because of these TBD dates, there are at least two where there are two games on the same day with a TBD location. We have Saturday, December 27th with Toronto and Montreal, and Minnesota versus Vancouver. Could we be seeing a doubleheader Takeover Tour day? We could also be seeing it on Saturday, January 11th. We have Ottawa versus Boston and Vancouver versus Montreal. Another opportunity for a doubleheader Takeover Tour day there, which I think if you're looking at cities who are finalists for the next wave of expansion, I think this is a good little nugget to give to those cities, right? And say, hey, sorry, we couldn't get you in this first round, but you're going to get a team in the next round. And as a thank you, and here's a little gift of a double header of the PWHL here. So yeah. I do think that's possible.
I mean, I know for some people, NHL, PWHL doubleheaders would be awesome. But for the purposes of this podcast, a PWHL doubleheader in a city that could see expansion. I mean, that's pretty exciting. Will Wrigley Field in any way or the city of Chicago be involved? Again, we broke that news due to my LinkedIn sleuthing, which I think is still hilarious.
Yeah, now that's a really good segue because those 2 dates that I mentioned specifically were on Saturdays, and that lends itself to a doubleheader. It's tough to find a good building that has a full day open like that, though, and so I do see it's a challenge, and it'll have to depend, and I have not dug so deep dive into what buildings might be available in potential expansion cities on that day, but I'm sure Quebec City would make it work however they want to for
Yeah,
that.
that's
But
true. Yeah.
another day here where there are 2 games and both of them are TBD that I did not bring up yet is Friday, January 3rd. And I bring that up only because the NHL Winter Classic is Thursday, January 2nd in Miami. And like I know we've been there in the past with women's hockey and it did not go well, and there's a lot of like consternation around it, with the injury and are they going to do this? But I feel like enough time has passed that maybe the day after the Winter Classic, they could keep the ice up and have a game there from the PWHL on the Friday.
I guess we'll see. We know women's hockey has been involved at NHL events, including All Star, year over year. It's looked a little different as the leagues have looked different, but I think that could be interesting. I mean, the ice being good, though, you mentioned why for some we haven't made a return there, and that was part of the reason. Now, it was not in Florida,
Yes.
it was at Gillette Stadium in Massachusetts. So, I mean, I think this is not just for the PWHL, but also for the NHL players. I mean, these outdoor
Yes.
venues, making sure that you can maintain really good ice is huge, and that can be a challenge when you're outside, especially in places where I say especially as if these places are the same as they were even 5 years ago, let alone 15, 20 years ago. But you have more of a chance of sunshine weather in Miami than I don't know, Chicago, for example, or even Seattle when they had the Winter Classic, which was the first day the PWHL had official games. The sun was very strong, and those are also things. So I think it'll be interesting. Where exactly are they hosting in Miami? Like what arena or location?
I don't remember off the top of my head, but it
Trying to
is a stadium in Miami. I
Yeah.
do know that for sure.
The only reason I ask is because another way that hockey leagues, aka the NHL, are kind of getting away with that is if you have an outdoor venue that you can transform specifically because of rain, that so it has a cover. That was T-Mobile
Yeah.
Park in Seattle for sure. So that's another thing. And I mean, maybe not as much in January, but Miami is certainly known for rain.
Yeah, it is Lone Depot Park. So it is where the Marlins play. So,
Yeah.
uh,
I
read into that what you will. Now, like I will say, as far as the other TBD dates out there, I would of course lean toward Friday nights and Saturdays as the days that are most likely to be takeover tour dates, just because weekend activities make it more feasible and, in terms of attendance, I would say. So if you're looking at any of these TBD games that are like a Wednesday or a Tuesday, probably just a venue issue. So you can narrow the list down a little bit that way. But I do think there is some interesting level to some of these double headers and the Winter Classic possibility. But the TBD dates are also spread out really nicely throughout the season. So I think a takeover tour works. in that sense as well. There's a good opportunity to have different teams involved, different cities involved, and all throughout the season like they've done in the past. So I do think that's good. I do also want to bring up a little nugget of a sort of not real thing, but a proposed thing that New York Sirens general manager Pascal Daou said to me. So I attended the contract press conference related to Kristyna Kaltounkova that the New York Sirens held, and we'll talk more about that side of things later. But talking with Pascal after the presser, I was asking him about the schedule, and we don't even know the playoff format yet, like what's going on with that. And he was very twinkle in the eye, because he does that, but he kind of said, oh, soon. But he said that he had specifically pitched to the league a takeover style element to the playoff format, where if you have your 8 teams, right, your top 3 teams in the league automatically get into the playoffs. So that's set. You have 1 spot left to be in the official playoffs. You have a takeover style weekend tournament between the next 4 teams. So one team is eliminated out. You have teams 4, 5, 6, and 7 play a mini tournament to win that 4th spot in a neutral city. And I thought that was really interesting. I think there's something there.
I don't love the tournament element, to be honest. I know like MLB and other leagues, I guess even basketball, have done play-ins. The WNBA just moved away from that. I just think that I know that they're a lower seed, but I just, for the same reason I hate it's just what am I trying to say? Brain's fogging up here. For the same reason that I think that you can't just have endless overtimes, you got to get to the shootout eventually, is kind of why I don't like that, except on the front end. The seasons, we've already heard players talking a little bit about how the season's a rough go. There's going to be even more Olympic breaks coming up. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. So I get the idea. It definitely makes things exciting and excitable, but there's more travel. There's, I just think more room to have players have to work through injury at the front end of the playoffs. And for me, like, that's a little tough. Now, granted, I'm in the throes of covering the WNBA season. So and for those who are not following, that is a big topic of conversation in women's basketball right now, to the point where the commissioner is being called out. So maybe this idea of Pascal's just caught me at the wrong time, but that's all my brain can think about right now. I think a one and done play in, sure. I think a tournament style, ooh, I think it's an interesting idea, but I'm not completely sold right now.
I think that's fair. I think, I've mentioned having all the teams involved in the playoffs because it's easy to make a bracket with 8 teams, and it's harder, between 4 and 8 teams. And I think that there is some benefit to the league as a whole to have more than 4 teams involved in the playoffs. I think when you had a 6-team league, having 4 teams was perfect, right? But having 8 teams, and I know, like, proportionally in the NHL, it's half the teams that are involved in the playoffs. But I think with this league at this moment, there is a benefit to having, additional teams involved in the playoffs. And I think this is an interesting way of doing it. And maybe you're right that there's like okay, if you just have the 4 or 5 teams do a 1-game play in, maybe that's the middle ground here. But yeah, I do strongly believe at this point, maybe not in the future, but at this point, we need more than half the teams involved in the playoffs.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how they navigate that. I think the other part of this is, again, another conversation coming from the WNBA is they went to a 1-1-1, which I think is the most ridiculous thing in a 3-game series, to have the teams potentially move back and forth, for a 3-game series. But the reason they did a 1-1-1, it was so that the lower seed was guaranteed a home game. So with Pascal's idea, no one would get a home game in the postseason. I don't. I mean, I get, again, what is most important here. A player and fans probably want home games to see their home team in their home arena. The league wants as many touch points as possible. So what wins out in season 3? I think it's a really interesting. It's going to be interesting to see how they go about this. Also, if you want the lower seeds to have home games, this is more me speaking to the WNBA, then do a 1-2, because you should absolutely get the benefit of the doubt as the higher seed. And if you have to start on the road, sure, but you should have the chance to clinch 100% as the home team on
for
your
the
home
duration.
ice. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, that's been how sports work
No,
for.
I agree.
I mean, not everything that the boys do makes sense, but this is like a
That's an
universal.
understatement.
This is like a universal thing that I think we can get with. So interesting nuggets. But as you mentioned, you were able to go to that press conference, speak to Pascal, and hear from their number one pick. We'll get into that and other news, including international schedules, coming up on the Women's Hockey Report. Take us home, Rachel. You were around the Sirens recently as they
Yeah.
had an in-person press conference to announce or to introduce, not announce. We know who their number one pick was, but to officially introduce their number one pick.
Yeah, I think, the interesting part of it for me was, and I asked directly to Kalti, about the contract negotiation process, because this is something that, has been of interest to me in terms of the players having specific power in the league, and, what the role of the Players Association is in this process. So I asked her directly about, did she involve Sarah Fillier in conversations to help her negotiate as a fellow first overall pick? And, how did the Players Association factor into any of it? And she said it didn't really. I mean, that she's talked to Sarah Fillier, but she said the negotiation process was pretty easy. She and Pascal kind of looked at each other and were like, yeah, it went pretty easy. And I was like, I want you, like, no, you got to play hardball in some ways. But, she did sign a 3-year deal. And, I think that part of it, when the deal was announced, was the most interesting, because I think the Sirens are a very risky proposition, to be honest, at this time. And I'd also talked to Pascal a little bit about, having to do a rebuild so early in the process here. And he basically, not so many words, was like, yeah, it is interesting. And provides a challenge in a lot of ways, but that he has a plan, and that he's very glad to have, like, the 2 building block pieces, and Sarah Fillier and Kalti there to build upon. And, to kind of, for Kalti to make that commitment, like, she must have gotten some sort of reassurance from Pascal Daoust that there is a plan there. Like, she must have.
I certainly hope so, because I mean, I've talked about it before. I think the vision, let me put it this way, the action at the draft versus the long-term vision, two different
Mhm.
things. I think I've been very critical of leadership of the New York team, and
Mhm.
even when they became the Sirens. And I was happy to say, putting that aside, they were aggressive during the draft. So
Yeah, they did a great job.
there's an understanding there, like high marks on the draft, but that doesn't always mean high marks in action. Again, not to make it all about the WNBA, but the Dallas Wings are a perfect example of that. They've had multiple number one picks or top 3 picks that some of them aren't even in the league. Some of them didn't even play 2 full seasons in the WNBA. And to me, that is the question that I have, not so much about the talent, but the talent going to an organization that the vision kind of ends with the gotta catch 'em all Pokemon approach to the
Well,
draft.
and you say that, and when I talked to Pascal about that, because I said specifically to him, that I thought he was gonna take Casey O'Brien first, right? And then maybe Kaltounkova with the other pick, with all the deals that with the deal that took place. And he said that, there were some other potential deals on the table, and the way, the winds were saying that this was the order he had to do it in to get both of them. And so, okay, like that's fair. I just think that, I think they did a good job overall. Like I said, like I have no beef with it, but I just thought that aspect of it was pretty interesting and kind of
Yeah.
explains how it played out.
Yeah, I'm glad you were able to be there. And, this is what we hope to continue to do at the Women's Hockey Report as we continue growing the show. So, all the more reason. Again, this is, I have not 100% enthusiasm today, but I'm going to give you 100% of what I do have. Subscribe. Make sure you are following us. If you want all of your curated women's hockey report content, then make sure you're following us on TikTok under women's_hockey_report. But Rachel, before we close the episode, a few things scheduling wise that we've heard, where we're getting a little bit more of an idea of what the women's hockey landscape will look like outside of the PWHL.
Yeah, so one of the things we've been talking about with the international side of things is what they were going to do with women's worlds this year, because we saw how much of a pain it was last season to break up the very tail end of the PWHL season, for them to go play women's worlds and then come back and only have a couple of games and then try to go into the playoffs. It just didn't work, I think, just from a momentum and a structural perspective. And so this year, because there is that big Olympic break in the middle that's already being taken, they are moving women's worlds to November of 2026, and it'll be in Denmark, which I think is fantastic, to have it there. And so that'll be really good.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there have been teams knocking at the door, which, we haven't talked about it explicitly, but centralization has been a thing. It's centralization, and what is I forget, but the United States and Canada have two different terms, which basically mean the same thing, where
Right.
the team comes together for upward of, several months before the Olympics. But with the PWHL, that's not happening. Sarah Fillier is one of the people on social media who's been explaining what this means. It's little breaks, most likely what we see with USA basketball on the women's side, because they have the WNBA. So there's pockets of kind of mini camps and things of that nature that they'll do. And so I'm very curious how, if at all, the lack of centralization for the United States and Canada, alongside there being more of a European footprint internationally, where European teams aren't necessary are able to maybe mimic in some ways a little bit of that, have some time right before the tournament, which is not usual for them
Right.
unless they do take several months. And mostly you'll see that if a team might do that if they're hosting, especially in Olympics, and then we'll see them kind of centralize or something like that. But I wonder, to your point, like, is this an opportunity for European clubs and programs to really get the shine? And what comes first? Is it the teams and clubs, the federations, I should say, that have already invested? And Czechia stands out on the women's side. I think Finland is trying to get back in a good place. They've had hiccups. We know Switzerland and Sweden have had their issues with the federation versus players. But I mean, what is going to be the great equalizer when it and to your point, is it a landscape that will ultimately topple the United States and Canada? I don't know. What role does the PWHL schedule play in all of that if we're not seeing USA and Canada go away for months? And be able to curate these teams ahead of the Olympics? Does that have an impact? Will it be even better, right? Will there be even more dominance? Because when they do get together, it's super focused, hyper focused, kind of like sprints of camps. I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting to see for sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's all we have for this episode of the Women's Hockey Report, but we do have a schedule now. We will do a deeper dive as we get more details, especially on those TBD dates. And so grateful that Rachel was also able to provide some insight, especially with some of those conversations with Pascal. We don't have, so we do have a regular season schedule, but we don't have a postseason format. So I'm sure we will be pining about that for the next month or so until we have PWHL action. Camps will start up in about a month, and so we'll see what happens from there. But for Rachel Donner, Erica L Ayala, this has been the Women's Hockey Report, part of the Locked On NHL channel and the Locked On Podcast Network.